The bitter wind howled through the streets of Empire City, Nevada, carrying with it tiny shards of ice that felt like needles against exposed skin. And Helena Bradford stood frozen on the steps of the Silver Star Hotel, her worn carpetbag clutched in trembling fingers as she wondered if crossing half the country to marry a stranger had been the worst mistake of her life. It was December 1882, and the unexpected winter storm had transformed the dusty mining town into a treacherous landscape of ice and snow, so unlike the gentle winters she had known back in Philadelphia. She had arrived on the afternoon stage, her bones aching from 3 weeks of brutal travel, only to discover that her intended husband, a mine foreman named Richard Colton, had been killed in a cave in 2 days prior. The hotel clerk had delivered the news with all the warmth of the frozen ground outside. And now, Helena found herself stranded in a strange town with exactly $11 to her name and nowhere to go. The wind cut through her thin wool coat as if it were made of paper, and her teeth chattered so violently she could barely think straight. Behind her, the hotel door remained firmly shut. The clerk had made it clear that without payment in advance, she would not be welcome to stay the night. Around her, the few people still brave enough to be on the streets hurried past with their heads down, intent only on reaching warmth and shelter. No one spared her a second glance. She tried to take a step forward, but her legs refused to cooperate, whether from cold or fear or sheer exhaustion, she could not say. "Miss, you cannot stay there." A gruff voice came from behind the door. "You are blocking the entrance." Helena tried to move again, but her feet felt like lead weights. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she genuinely could not make her body obey. Panic rose in her chest, mixing with the numbness that was spreading through her limbs. Was this how she would die? Frozen on the steps of a hotel in a town that did not want her, I said, "Move along." The voice came again, harsher this time. She opened her mouth to explain that she was trying, that she truly wanted nothing more than to move, but her jaw was so stiff that the words came out as barely a whisper. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried when her parents died of typhoid fever. She had not cried when she sold everything she owned to pay their debts. She had not even cried when she answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride, knowing it meant leaving behind the only life she had ever known. She would not cry now. What seems to be the trouble here? The new voice was different, warm and concerned, with a hint of a drawl that marked the speaker as someone who had spent their life out west. Helena tried to turn her head toward the sound, but even that small movement seemed beyond her capabilities. Heavy footsteps crunched across the icy boardwalk, and then a tall figure appeared in her line of vision. The man was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn Stetson, and eyes the color of summer grass. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat over denim and leather, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. There was kindness in those green eyes as they took in her predicament. "Madam, are you hurt?" He crouched down slightly so he could look directly at her face. "Can you speak, C.C. Cold?" Helena managed to stammer out. "Cannot move." Understanding flashed across his features, followed immediately by concern. Without another word, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The residual warmth from his body felt like heaven against her frozen skin. "How long have you been standing out here?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. "D don't know," she admitted. 30 minutes. "An hour, Christ," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "I am going to pick you up now, if that is all right with you. You need to get warm or you will lose your fingers and toes." Helena managed a small nod, too cold and too desperate to care about propriety. The man bent down and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Through the fog of cold and confusion, she was dimly aware that this should probably frighten her, being carried by a strange man in a strange town, but all she felt was profound relief at being taken away from those terrible steps. "My bag," she whispered. "I have got it," he assured her, somehow managing to hold both her and her carpetbag as he strode down the boardwalk with purpose. "The hotel would not take you in. No money," she said simply. There seemed no point in hiding the truth of her situation. He made a sound of disgust, but said nothing more as he carried her down the street. The world passed in a blur of white and gray. She could feel her body starting to shake uncontrollably as the first hints of warmth from his coat began to penetrate her frozen clothing. That was good, she thought distantly. She remembered her father, who had been a doctor, saying once that shivering meant the body was still trying to warm itself. It was when the shivering stopped that you had to worry. The cowboy kicked open a door with his boot, and suddenly they were inside a building that felt wonderfully, blessedly warm. The scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils, and she realized he had brought her to a stable. "Rusty," he called out, "I need help." An older man with a gray beard emerged from one of the stalls, took one look at Helena and immediately sprang into action. "How long was she out there?" "Long enough," the younger man replied grimly. "We need to warm her up slowly. Is the office stove going? Fired it up an hour ago." "Take her in there." Rusty hurried ahead of them, opening a door that led to a small office at the back of the stable. True to his word, a pot-bellied stove glowed with heat in the corner, making the cramped space almost unbearably warm after the bitter cold outside. The cowboy set Helena down gently in a chair near the stove, but not too close. "We need to get these wet clothes off you," he said, then immediately flushed. "I mean, Rusty, go fetch Mrs. Chen from the laundry. We need a woman here to help." "I am fine," Helena protested weakly, though her hands were still shaking too badly to even unbutton her coat. "You are not fine," the cowboy said firmly but kindly. "You have been out in below freezing temperatures in wet clothes for who knows how long. Frostbite is a real danger, not to mention what the cold can do to your insides." He grabbed a blanket from a shelf and draped it over the coat he had already given her. "My name is Yates Holloway, by the way. I work as a ranch hand at the Double B spread, just outside of town." "Helena Bradford," she managed through chattering teeth. "I was supposed to be married today." Yates pulled up another chair and sat down facing her, concern etched in every line of his face. "Supposed to be," he died. "Cave in at the mine, 2 days ago." The words came easier now as feeling slowly returned to her lips and tongue. "I have no family, no money, and nowhere to go." "Hell," Yates said quietly. He ran a hand through his dark hair, making it stand up in places. "That is a rough hand to be dealt." Before Helena could respond, Rusty returned with a petite Chinese woman who immediately took charge of the situation. "Mrs. Chen shooed both men out of the office and helped Helena out of her wet clothes, replacing them with a warm, dry shirt that was clearly meant for a man and several wool blankets. She examined Helena's fingers and toes carefully, nodding with satisfaction when she found no signs of serious frostbite. "You are lucky," Mrs. Chen said in accented but clear English. "That young man, he saved your life. Another hour and you would have lost your toes for certain, maybe more." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes again, this time from gratitude rather than despair. "I do not even know him." "Yates Holloway is a good man," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Good heart, works hard, does not drink or gamble like so many of the others." She poured something hot and fragrant from a thermos she had brought with her. "Drink this. Ginger tea, it will warm you from inside. Helena accepted the cup with still trembling hands and took a cautious sip. The tea was sweet and spicy, and she could feel its warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder gently. "You rest now. The men, they will figure out what to do next." Outside the office, Helena could hear the low murmur of male voices. She caught fragments of the conversation. "Cannot just turn her out. Maybe the church?" asked Mrs. Patterson. The voices were concerned, trying to solve the problem of what to do with an unexpected woman in their midst. Helena felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had become a burden, a problem to be solved. Eventually, Yates knocked on the door. "Miss Bradford, may I come in?" "Yes," she called out, making sure the blankets were securely wrapped around her. He entered, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. "I have been thinking about your situation. Empire City is not a large town, but there are opportunities here for someone willing to work. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the boarding house, is getting on in years and could use help with the cleaning and cooking. The school teacher mentioned last week that she could use an assistant, especially with the younger children. And Mrs. Chen here always has more laundry than she can handle on her own." "I can work," Helena said quickly. "I am not afraid of hard work. Back in Philadelphia, I kept house for my parents and took in sewing to help make ends meet." "Good," Yates said, a small smile crossing his face. "That is good. The thing is, you need a place to stay tonight and probably for a few nights while we figure out something more permanent." He hesitated, then continued. "The stable here has a room upstairs. It is not fancy, but it is clean and warm. Rusty says you are welcome to stay there for as long as you need. No charge." Helena felt her eyes fill with tears again, and this time she could not stop them from falling. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Yates looked surprised by the question. "Because you need help and I can give it. That is reason enough, is it not?" He shifted his weight, looking down at his boots. "My mother, she died when I was young. But I remember her telling me that the measure of a person is not what they do when it is easy, but what they do when it is hard. Helping someone in need, that is just the right thing to do." "I will pay you back," Helena promised. "Every cent once I find work, I swear it." "There is nothing to pay back," Yates said firmly, "but I appreciate the sentiment." He glanced at Mrs. Chen. "Do you think she is well enough to move upstairs? I can carry her if need be, Mrs. Chen checked Helena over once more, then nodded. "She can walk, I think, with help. But she must stay warm and dry. No going out in the cold again tonight." With Yates on one side and Mrs. Chen on the other, Helena made her way up the narrow stairs to the room above the stable. It was small and simply furnished with a bed, a chair, a washstand, and a small stove, but it was blessedly warm and dry. Someone, probably Rusty, had already brought up her carpet bag and set it at the foot of the bed. "Get some rest," Yates said from the doorway. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you and we can talk about finding you work." He paused, then added, "Welcome to Empire City, Miss Bradford. I am sorry your arrival was not what you expected, but I hope things will look up from here." After they left, Helena sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her parents, for the life she had lost, for the future she had imagined that would now never come to pass. But underneath the grief and fear, there was also a tiny spark of something else. Hope, perhaps, or gratitude. A stranger had seen her in need and had helped her without asking for anything in return. That meant something. That meant that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. She woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure of where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory came flooding back. The frozen steps, Yates Holloway, the stable. She sat up slowly, testing her body. Her fingers and toes were sore and tender, but everything seemed to be working properly. The clothes Mrs. Chen had given her were still dry and warm. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Bradford, it is Yates. I brought breakfast." Helena quickly wrapped a blanket around herself like a shawl and opened the door. Yates stood there with a covered plate and a steaming cup of coffee. He looked freshly scrubbed, his dark hair still damp and combed back from his face. "Good morning," he said, offering her the plate. "Mrs. Chen made you eggs and biscuits. She said you need to eat to get your strength back." "That is very kind," Helena said, accepting the food. The smell made her stomach growl audibly, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday morning. "Please come in. I feel terrible making you stand in the hallway." Yates hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the impropriety of being alone with her in her room, but finally stepped just inside the doorway, leaving the door wide open. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Much better, thank you." Helena set the plate down on the small table by the window and gestured for him to take the chair while she sat on the edge of the bed. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did yesterday. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Yates said, but color rose in his cheeks at the praise. "No," Helena said firmly. "They would not have. Many people walked past me on those steps. You were the only one who stopped." She took a bite of the eggs, nearly groaning with pleasure at the taste of hot food. "You said last night that there might be work available in town." "Yes. I spoke to Mrs. Patterson this morning before coming here. She would like to meet with you this afternoon if you are feeling up to it. The work would be cleaning rooms, helping with meals, things like that. She can offer room and board plus a small wage." Yates leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "It is not exciting work, but it would be steady." "It sounds perfect," Helena said honestly. Any work was better than no work, and room and board would solve her most immediate problems. "What time should I meet with her?" 2:00. "The boarding house is 3 buildings down from the hotel on the same side of the street. You cannot miss it. There is a big sign out front." Yates stood, clearly preparing to leave. "Your clothes from yesterday are at the laundry. Mrs. Chen said they should be dry by this afternoon." "I will need to pay her for that," Helena said, worry creeping into her voice. "And for the breakfast and the room." "Already taken care of," Yates said quickly. "Consider it a welcome to town gift." "But I cannot accept charity," Helena protested. "I have to be able to stand on my own 2 feet." "It is not charity," Yates said, and there was a firmness in his voice that brooked no argument. "It is neighbors helping neighbors. That is how things work out here. Today I help you, tomorrow you help someone else. That is the way of it." He settled his hat back on his head. "I have to get back to the ranch for work, but I will try to come by tomorrow to see how the meeting with Mrs. Patterson went." He was gone before Helena could say anything else, his boots heavy on the stairs. She sat in the quiet room, slowly eating her breakfast and trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She had come to Empire City expecting to start a new life as a wife. Instead, she had nearly died and had been saved by a kind stranger. Now she was preparing to start over in a way she had never anticipated, relying on herself rather than a husband. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. At 1:00, Helena walked to Mrs. Chen's laundry to collect her clothes. They had been washed, dried, and pressed, and looked better than they had in weeks. Mrs. Chen refused to accept payment, saying that Yates had already settled the account. Helena was beginning to understand that arguing about such things in Empire City was useless. So she simply thanked the older woman and promised to return the borrowed clothes as soon as possible. At precisely 2:00, Helena knocked on the door of Patterson's boarding house. It was a large, well-maintained building with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows and a neat front garden that was currently buried under snow. The door was opened by a plump woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. "You must be Miss Bradford," the woman said, looking Helena up and down with an assessing gaze. "I am Dorothy Patterson. Come in, come in. No sense standing in the cold." The interior of the boarding house was warm and welcoming, with floral wallpaper and sturdy furniture that had clearly seen years of use. Mrs. Patterson led Helena to a small parlor off the main hallway and gestured for her to sit. "Yates Holloway came to see me this morning, Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. "Told me about your situation. Mail-order bride, intended husband dead, stranded with no money. That about the size of it?" "Yes, madam," Helena said quietly. "There was no point in trying to pretty it up. He also said you nearly froze to death on the hotel steps because that weasel Perkins would not let you in out of the cold." Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp with disapproval. "I have half a mind to give that man a piece of my mind." "It was not his fault," Helena said quickly. "I had no money to pay for a room. HMPH, common decency should count for something." Mrs. Patterson leaned back in her chair, studying Helena with those sharp eyes. "I am looking for someone to help around the house. I have 8 rooms that I rent out, mostly to miners and ranch hands. They need to be cleaned daily, linens changed twice a week. I serve breakfast and dinner every day, so I need help with the cooking and the dishes. It is hard work and the hours are long." "I am not afraid of hard work," Helena assured her. So Yates said, "Mrs. Patterson tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair. "I can offer you room and board in exchange for the work, plus $8 a month in wages. You would have Sunday afternoons off, but otherwise I would expect you here and working. Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me. I can make bread, stews, roasts, pies, most common dishes." "Good. Can you read and write?" "Yes, madam. My father believed in education." Mrs. Patterson nodded, seeming satisfied. "Then we have a deal. You can move in tomorrow if you like. I will show you to your room and explain your duties." Relief flooded through Helena so intensely that she felt dizzy with it. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You will not regret this, I promise." "See that I do not," the older woman said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice. "Now let me show you around. The room Mrs. Patterson showed her was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the back garden. It had a proper bed with a real mattress, a wardrobe, a washstand with a mirror, and even a small writing desk. To Helena, who had spent the last night in a room above a stable, it looked like luxury. "It is perfect," she breathed. "It is practical," Mrs. Patterson corrected, but she looked pleased. "I will expect you here by 6 tomorrow morning to help with breakfast. We have a full house right now, so there will be 10 people to feed." Helena spent the rest of the afternoon learning the layout of the boarding house and the routines that governed its daily operation. Mrs. Patterson was a tough taskmaster, but she was also fair and patient as she explained how things worked. By the time Helena left to return to her room above the stable, her head was spinning with information about meal schedules, cleaning supplies, and the particular quirks of various boarders. Yates was waiting for her outside the stable, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He straightened when he saw her approach. "How did it go?" he asked. "I got the job," Helena said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I start tomorrow morning." "That is wonderful," Yates said, and his grin was genuine and warm. "I knew Mrs. Patterson would like you." "I do not know about like," Helena said dryly, "but she seems willing to give me a chance, which is all I can ask for." She looked at him curiously. "Why did you do all this for me? You do not know anything about me. I could be a terrible person." Yates laughed at that, a rich sound that made something warm bloom in Helena's chest. "Are you a terrible person?" "I do not think so," Helena said, "but I am biased." "Well, I do not think so either," Yates said. He scuffed his boot against the ground, suddenly looking younger and less certain. "I saw you standing on those steps yesterday, and you looked so lost and scared. It reminded me of a time when I was lost and scared and someone helped me. I guess I wanted to pay that kindness forward." "What happened to you?" Helena asked before she could stop herself. "If you do not mind my asking." Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the snow-covered street. "I was 15 when my father died. Drink got him in the end, left me and my younger brother with nothing but debts. I thought we would end up in an orphanage or worse. But the foreman at the ranch where my father had worked, he took us both in. Gave us jobs and a place to live, taught us how to be men. He did not have to do any of that, but he did it anyway." He looked back at Helena. "He died 3 years ago, but I think about him every day. What he did for us, that changed the course of our whole lives." "Where is your brother now?" Helena asked. "Montana. He has his own spread up there now, raises cattle. We write when we can." Yates smiled. "He is getting married this spring, to a woman he met at church, can you believe it? My wild little brother settling down." "That is wonderful," Helena said softly. She thought about her own family, about all the people she had lost. "You are lucky to still have each other." "I know," Yates said simply. He cleared his throat as if embarrassed by the emotional turn of the conversation. "I should let you get some rest. You have a big day tomorrow." "Wait," Helena said as he turned to go. "Will I see you again? I mean, I know you are busy with work, but I would like to thank you properly." "Maybe I could make you dinner sometime, once I am settled." Yates turned back, and there was something in his eyes that made Helena's breath catch. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." He left then, striding off into the gathering dusk, and Helena climbed the stairs to her temporary room feeling lighter than she had in months. She had a job, a place to live, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of a friendship with someone kind and good. It was more than she had dared to hope for just 24 hours ago. The next morning, Helena rose before dawn and made her way through the still dark streets to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the massive cast iron stove. "Good, you are on time," the older woman said approvingly. "Put on an apron and start slicing that bread. The men will be down in an hour and they will be hungry." Helena fell into the rhythm of work with relief. There was something comforting about the familiar tasks of cooking and cleaning, something that made the strange new town feel a little more like home. The boarders began trickling down as the sun rose. Gruff men with weathered faces who nodded their thanks for the food and ate quickly before heading out to their various jobs. The days began to blur together into a comfortable routine. Helena rose before dawn, helped prepare and serve breakfast, cleaned the rooms while the boarders were at work, helped prepare and serve dinner, and then finally collapsed into her own bed exhausted but satisfied. Mrs. Patterson was demanding but not unkind, and she seemed pleased with Helena's work. It was nearly a week before Helena saw Yates again. She was outside hanging laundry in the weak winter sunshine when she heard his voice calling her name. She turned to find him walking up the path, leading a beautiful paint horse. "Yates," she called, surprised by how happy she was to see him. "What are you doing in town?" "Had to pick up supplies for the ranch," he said, tipping his hat to her. "Thought I would stop by and see how you were settling in." "Very well, thank you." Helena hung the last shirt and picked up the empty basket. "Mrs. Patterson is teaching me how to make her special apple pie. She says I have a light hand with pastry." "High praise from her," Yates said. "She is not one to hand out compliments lightly." He hesitated, then said, I was wondering if you might have some time this afternoon. I could show you around town properly, introduce you to some people. It helps to know your neighbors out here." Helena glanced back at the house. "I have Sunday afternoons off. I could meet you then if that works." "Sunday it is then," Yates agreed. "I will pick you up at 1 o'clock." He was as good as his word. That Sunday, promptly at 1, he arrived at the boarding house in a buckboard wagon. Helena had dressed in her best dress, a dark blue wool that she had carefully mended and pressed. Yates smiled when he saw her and offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. "You look lovely," he said, and then immediately looked embarrassed by his own boldness. "Thank you," Helena said, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks. "You look very nice yourself." They drove through the town, Yates pointing out various buildings and businesses. He introduced her to the owner of the general store, the blacksmith, the doctor, and the minister of the small Methodist church. Everyone was friendly, curious about the new woman in town but not unkind. Helena began to feel the tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosening. These were good people, she realized. Different from the city folk she had known in Philadelphia, perhaps rougher around the edges but fundamentally decent. "I want to show you something," Yates said as they left the town behind. He drove the wagon up a winding path into the hills above Empire City. The sun was bright on the snow, making everything sparkle like diamonds. When they reached a certain point, Yates pulled the wagon to a stop. "Look," he said, gesturing. Helena looked and gasped. Below them, the valley spread out in all its winter glory. She could see Empire City nestled in the valley floor, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear blue sky. Beyond the town, the mountains rose in majestic peaks, their slopes covered in pine trees and snow. It was breathtakingly beautiful. "This is my favorite spot," Yates said quietly. "I come here sometimes when I need to think, or when I need to remind myself why I love this land so much." "It is beautiful," Helena breathed. "So different from where I grew up. Philadelphia was all buildings and streets and people crowded together. I never saw anything like this." "Do you miss it?" Yates asked. "The city, I mean." Helena considered the question carefully. "I miss my parents, I miss the life I had before they died. But the city itself? No, I do not think I do. There is something about this place, this wildness and openness. It makes me feel like I can breathe for the first time in years." "I know what you mean," Yates said. He was sitting close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her coat. "I have never been east, but I have heard the stories. Too many people, too many rules about how things should be done. Out here, a person can make their own way. It does not matter who your parents were or how much money you have. What matters is whether you are willing to work hard and treat people fairly." "Is that why you became a ranch hand?" Helena asked. "Because you wanted to make your own way, partly," Yates admitted. "But mostly because I love the work. I love being outside, working with the cattle and horses. I love the freedom of riding across open range, the satisfaction of a hard day's work well done." He glanced at her. "I am saving money to buy my own place someday. Just a small spread, nothing fancy. But something that is mine, you know. I think that is wonderful," Helena said sincerely. "Everyone should have a dream to work toward." "What about you?" Yates asked. "What are your dreams?" Helena was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I thought my dream was to be married, to have a family. That is why I answered Mr. Colton's advertisement. But now I am not so sure. Working for Mrs. Patterson, earning my own money, making my own decisions, there is something satisfying about that. I think maybe I want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet before I lean on someone else." "That is a good dream, too," Yates said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just looking out at the view. Helena was acutely aware of Yates's presence beside her, of the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, of the strong, capable look of his hands holding the reins. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. They had only met a week ago, but there was something about him that made her feel safe and seen in a way she had not felt in a very long time. "We should probably head back," Yates said reluctantly as the sun began to sink toward the mountains. "I do not want Mrs. Patterson to think I have kidnapped you." The drive back to town was filled with easy conversation. Yates told her stories about life on the ranch, about ornery cattle and mischievous horses, about the other ranch hands and their various quirks. Helena found herself laughing more than she had in months, genuinely enjoying his company. When they arrived back at the boarding house, Yates helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Helena felt her heart skip a beat. "Thank you for this afternoon," she said. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Yates said. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but then seemed to think better of it. "I will come by again soon if that is all right with you." "I would like that very much," Helena said. She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing down the snowy street, and realized with a start that she was falling for him. It was too soon, she told herself sternly. She barely knew him, but her heart did not seem to care about logic or sense. It knew what it wanted. Over the following weeks, Yates became a regular visitor. He would stop by the boarding house whenever his work brought him to town, always with some excuse about needing to check on her.